Welcome back, everyone, to our 5 Things series, where we talk about everything global and we cover 5 important points. Today, we're going to cover another interesting topic that I think you'll be excited to learn about, or you may be a part of. Today, we're going to talk about virtual immigration. Now, over time, we've always spoken about immigration, and certainly it's still a hot topic in South Africa, where people consider immigrating out of this country to go and settle somewhere else. But the concept of virtual immigration is quite an interesting one. And in studio today, we've got Brandon Naidu. Brandon, welcome. And he's going to help us unpack some of the technical aspects to consider with this very interesting phenomenon called virtual immigration. So, Brandon, talk to us about virtual immigration. Is it a trend you're seeing in South Africa? Is it a trend that has taken off, or are people still considering it?
Thanks, Famida. Great to be back. So I think it's all in the name, right? Virtual immigration. It talks about the employee-employer relationship existing across borders, as it were. And I think when you talk about, is this trend one that's taken off, I think the pandemic has really accelerated this trend. It's shown us that remote working and the work from home phenomenon has shown us that remote working is possible and sometimes preferred. So yes, the trend is well and truly alive, and we're seeing a lot of South Africans get truly involved in it. And we've got some advantages that play in our favor as South Africans that make us quite employable across the globe. And I think being proficient in English is one of them, which makes you quite employable. Having a time zone that aligns quite nicely with Europe is obviously a massive benefit as well. And having the actual skills, the hard skills to be able to do a lot of these jobs that can be performed virtually makes us one of those destinations that people are looking at to employ when looking at this concept of virtual immigration, as you've termed it. And one last thing I want to say, some people immigrate for financial reasons. Yes, I know there's a whole host of reasons, but one of the reasons is financial. And now with virtual immigration and the fact that you could earn in a foreign currency while being based in South Africa, maybe that it sort of curbs the trend of immigration as we know it, but time will tell.
And I think, we've covered this in all our series, how the world is actually becoming such a small place and so much more accessible. Brandon, practically though, how accessible are these global opportunities, and where would one start looking for opportunities like this?
Sure, I suppose that's front of mind for most people when we start talking about a topic like this. And I think as with anything, it's all about a network, right? What complicates this is you need an international network. Where do you start? And something like LinkedIn would not be a bad place to start. I think it's a nice place to build up a professional network, especially now when you're considering something beyond borders. It would be a great starting point, but it goes beyond that, right? You could have friends and family who've emigrated over the years or perhaps work abroad, and that would be a nice place for you to go and tap into. Some desktop research would not hurt. And if you look at sites like an Indeed.com as an example, and you just type in remote work or international remote, you might be surprised. I saw above 480 jobs advertised on Indeed as an example. Not that I was looking, by the way.
Oh, no, definitely.
and even remote.co. So remote.co talks about anything related to remote work. And that was a useful place to really gain some knowledge and understanding in terms of what's out there, what types of opportunities are out there. Because I think a lot of people are first looking for what opportunities are out there and then trying to skill themselves to try and fit into those opportunities. So that would be, to me, a great starting point.
Yeah, and I think one of the major advantages of having the pandemic, if you choose to see the silver lining, was people were almost forced into looking for these opportunities beyond just the borders of South Africa. And I think economically, we're in a position now, hopefully, where those borders are actually more accessible. I want to maybe just divert a little bit and ask you for a few words on what you would think are some of the legal considerations anyone would need to consider before going this route.
Yeah, sure. I mean, legal's front of mind normally when we're talking about concepts like this. And for me, the starting point would actually be labor law. So labor law needs to be considered because generally, and I am generalizing here, you follow the labor law of the country where you're physically present. Now, we understand that in South Africa, we have, let me call it a fairly inflexible labor law system versus offshore in a country like the US, for example, where they're quite flexible with their labor law. So that could become a sticky point, and overcoming this employee-employer relationship is sometimes sought after. And I've known people who are freelancers who, rather than engage in the employee-employer relationship, because of a case like labor law being a restricting factor, have gone the route of setting up their own company and being used as a service provider rather than an employee. So I think labor law would be front of mind and something that I'd consider.
I think that's quite an interesting point and quite an interesting aspect, because it's certainly something that one would think about more as an afterthought, but quite rightly so. Understanding your rights as an employee and not an employee in South Africa is really quite an important one. There are other considerations. I imagine, if you're based in South Africa, but you're required to be present somewhere else in the world, the type of infrastructure and connectivity issues become quite important. What are some of the considerations, people would have to take into account to try and accommodate this type of virtual immigration, as you call it?
Sure. When you said the word infrastructure, my mind immediately went to load shedding.
Yes.
I mean, that unfortunate tragedy that we all face. So you need to be connected pretty much all the time if you want to be employed virtually, right? So having a backup power source would be a great place to start. Now whether that's a UPS or a generator or solar or some inverter, I mean, we've all become mini experts in this field, right? Is up to you and based on affordability and need, I suppose. But beyond that, Wi-Fi connectivity needs to be up to standard, because a lot of the time we're talking here about teleconferencing, that type of facility, being able to engage online, whether it's Teams or Zoom or whatever platform you're using. And when you're dealing in big teams, bandwidth becomes a consideration. So I think having backup power and having connectivity would be a great place to start. I mean, you do get let me call them the coffee shop jumpers, right? So literally they work from coffee shop to coffee shop based on connectivity and backup power issues, etc. But I mean, if you really want to take your virtual immigration seriously and be an employee that's trusted and dependent upon on people across the world, I think you need to have infrastructure in place. So that's actually a really good point.
Yeah, I mean, I think, just having some kind of sustained power source and connectivity, certainly. I mean, even in South Africa, with the hybrid working has become, quite a pain point for most companies from a productivity perspective. So absolutely noted. Practically the concept of now, earning in hard currency that isn't rand is quite an attractive one, but also brings with it its own set of complications, doesn't it? As it relates to your forex, coming in, as it relates to the South African Reserve Bank and some of their requirements, as it relates to the revenue services and what they might require. Any words of wisdom around that?
Sure. So there are layers of complexity involved in this. I mean, you mentioned the South African Reserve Bank. So the fact that you're earning in a foreign currency means that you need to follow some rules. And the rule is you need to convert that currency into rand within a 30-day period. So that's important to note for people who are employed and earning in USD or GBP, as an example. Another consideration, and we've spoken about this at length, but if you still are a South African resident, which you are in this case, you are paying tax on your worldwide receipts and accruals. So absolutely, SARS will take their piece in terms of what you're earning abroad. So I think those 2 points would need to be noted. And I'm probably repeating myself here, but in all of your considerations, I think going back and having these types of conversations with your trusted financial partner or your financial advisor would absolutely put you in a good place.
No, absolutely. I mean, as you were talking about it, Brandon, I think immediately the fluctuation in your salary also, given that we are the third most volatile currency in the world, comes into play. And so, for people that have virtually immigrated, as you coin it, times when the rand is a bit weaker against, whatever currency, you should expect a little bit more, and then vice versa. And, those kind of fluctuations need to be budgeted for and taken into account, of course, with your financial planning. And a great point to make as it relates to making sure that you partner with a financial advisor as you go through any of these options, or seriously consider maybe virtually immigrating. Thank you so much for joining us. Liberty is in it with you. We are talking about offshore investing. Thank you.